Welcome everybody, and I am here to do an APUS history review for your essay question on Friday on religious freedom in the colonies. Remember, our essay will be on Friday, postponed due to the presidential debate this Monday. So the question is to analyze the extent to which religious freedom existed in the British North American colonies between 1607, which is the founding of Jamestown, the first permanent British colony, and 1750, which is getting close to the French and Indian War. So for the essay question, you will be required to complete various components to get 6 full points on the long essay question. When you take the AP exam, there will be 2 long essay questions to choose from, and you have to select one of them. Here's a breakdown for the 6 points. Number 1, you have to have a thesis, and I'd like to see that thesis in your opening paragraph. Then you will get 2 points for the overall support, the evidence that you use to defend the argument. Another 2 points, there will be a specific historical thinking skill tested. So if it's a comparison of two, so for example, from what we've learned, if you were to compare the New England colonies with the Chesapeake colonies, that would get you 2 points. Continuity and change over time, if you would show some sort of like a turning point issue, that would get you 2 points. Causation, if the essay is a causes and effects of a war, that would get you 2 points. And then periodization, demonstrating the time period. For our purposes, I believe this essay is a comparison essay because we're comparing the level of religious freedom that exists in each of the colonies. Then your last point is called synthesis, and when I get to that slide, I'll explain to you how I think you can best go about getting that point. So here we go. In your opening paragraph for the essay, I would make sure that you have a strong thesis statement that demonstrates you understand what you are trying to prove in the essay. So if you believe that religious freedom existed throughout the colonies, that can be your thesis. If you believe religious freedom did not exist in the colonies, that can be the basis of your thesis. If you believe that religious freedom existed in some colonies but not others, that could be your thesis. What I can't give it to you. You have, and none of them are incorrect, as long as it's stated clearly. I know what my advice would be. I know what I would choose if I were writing this essay, but I can't do that for you. You have to decide what level of religious freedom do you think existed. Now, when you're writing this opening paragraph, I always think a good way to start is to kind of explain what happened just prior to the question. So you may want to start with, after the failed attempt at the Roanoke colony, the English were finally successful at Jamestown. Or you might want to say, during the 1500s, colonization was largely completed by the Spanish, but then the English were successful later. These are just some ways to get you going to start the first paragraph. Your thesis and your first paragraph really should only be, I would say, between 3 and 6 sentences. I don't think you should write your entire essay in the opening paragraph, but make sure you have that strong thesis statement that clearly says what level of religious freedom do you believe existed in the colonies. I feel like I should be asking questions, but obviously I can't do that on YouTube. All right, although you probably can these days. All right, so now, what should your body paragraphs be? This is where you have to make a decision. Do you want to divide up the essay into the different geographic regions of the colonies? New England, which would be New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and Connecticut. Do you want it to be and then the Mid-Atlantic, which would be New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Delaware. The Chesapeake, which would be Virginia and Maryland. Southern, which would be North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia. That's one way you could divide up the essay. Another way is you could divide it up based on the level of religious freedom and tolerance that you believe existed. Rhode Island and Pennsylvania were the most tolerant, but they're from different geographic regions. Maryland, New York, New Jersey, Virginia, Georgia, they were somewhat tolerant. Massachusetts and Connecticut, either you followed the puritanical religion or you were banished, so they were not tolerant at all. And then there were other colonies that just really didn't focus on religion very much. A third way to approach the essay is to simply write it chronologically. For every other time period we learn about this year, that will be my suggestion to you, but not for the colonies, because I didn't teach it chronologically, and I think it's a very daunting task to approach it that way. Feel free to try, but my advice would be either to break it up by region or to break it up by the level of tolerance. Again, I feel like asking questions, but I think I explained that well enough. Now, what I did for you in the next couple of slides is I broke down the details for each of the colonies related to religion. So I'm not going to just read this for you because that makes no sense, but I can summarize a couple of key points. In Massachusetts, which was Plymouth, Massachusetts Bay, which combined together, they were very strict. So if you were not a member of the Puritan Church, you were going to be kicked out. There was really almost no religious tolerance there. For example, John Winthrop's A City Upon a Hill. He was the very strict leader of the colony. Harvard College was established simply to train people to be priests at the time. And don't forget that toward the, as fewer people were committed to religion, the colony did have to make some concessions. So the halfway covenant was a way to say that even if you did not go through a conversion experience, you could still be a partial member, of the colony. And then later in the time period, Jonathan Edwards gave the very famous speech, "Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God," which tried to now scare people through images of going to hell if they were not religious. Rhode Island, on the other hand, is the place where people who were banished from the colony were kicked out to. So that was Roger Williams and Anne Hutchinson, two of the leaders of the founding of that colony. Rhode Island welcomed everybody. And don't forget to reference the article that I posted about Anne Hutchinson, which will give you more detail for the essay. Connecticut is more similar with Massachusetts, as is Rhode Island. Connecticut had these very strict laws that you could even be killed if you used like your mother or father's name in a swear. And I know that there was like no drinking allowed in these colonies, no dancing on Sunday. So Connecticut was as strict as Massachusetts. Okay, now we go to the Mid-Atlantic colonies. And this is where you have another extremely tolerant colony, Pennsylvania, known as the Holy Experiment, which was a place for Quakers to practice freely. The Society of Friends is their more common name. William Penn was the founder. And unlike in Massachusetts, where the right to vote was largely based on your religious beliefs, this did not exist in Pennsylvania. Women were treated equally. Native Americans were treated equally. They were a very peaceful, pacifist group of people, and the most tolerant along with Rhode Island. New Jersey and Delaware were inhabited by Quakers, so it kind of coincides with Pennsylvania. New York, on the other hand, was not as tolerant. New York was, at first, when it was a Dutch colony, was very strict to anybody who was not a Puritan. And those restrictions were limited when it became New York, but they really were not a colony focused on religion. All right, then we go to the Chesapeake Colonies. There's a difference here. Virginia, which starts at the Jamestown settlement, was really not, religion was not a major part of life in Virginia. Yes, they had the Anglican Church, but there weren't a lot of restrictions placed. Maryland, on the other hand, allowed some level of religious freedom. Maryland originally was a colony for Catholics. It was given as a land grant to Cecilius Calvert, who was known as Lord Baltimore. But when Protestants moved in, conflict arose, and they were basically fighting over control of the local chapel. In 1649, they passed the Religious Toleration Act, which allowed for freedom of religion for all Christian people. But it's not the most tolerant, especially since anybody who was not a Christian, the punishment was death. And then we go to the southern colonies. Religion really doesn't play much of a factor in North Carolina and South Carolina. Georgia, on the other hand, which was a place for debtors led by James Oglethorpe, they did have the Anglican Church as more of a force, but they allowed Jews to practice freely there. The only religion that they did not welcome was Catholicism. So that just gives you some information on the colonies. I am also going to post some pages from the textbook. I'll put that on Schoology when I post this. So now that would get you the 4 points. How well did you argue and defend your thesis? And how well did you show the historical thinking skill of comparison, of showing how the different colonies compared to each other? So how do you get the last point of synthesis? This would be in your conclusion. There are several ways to get this. One way is to demonstrate what happened next in the time period. What was the development? So you take 1750 and you would follow through by saying that now there was a French and Indian War, and that will lead eventually to the American Revolution. If you know time periods, that's a good way to get that point. Another way is to take the theme of this essay, which is religious freedom, and connect it to another time period in history where that similar theme was relevant. The problem for this essay is that I have not taught you the rest of the course. So these things that I put here, you don't know, the Second Great Awakening or the Scopes Monkey Trial. But a third way you can get the point is to make a comparison to something today. So all of you who you notice when I talk about current events, I do it for 2 reasons. Number 1, because I think it's important to be an informed citizen. But number 2, it actually helps you to get a point on the synthesis. So if you wanted to make a reference to religious freedom or religious issues today, that would get you the point. One suggestion I could give you is that there is a little bit of irony in the fact that Massachusetts was largely founded on religious reasons and the Carolinas were not, yet today the southern part of the country is actually often referred to as the Bible Belt because there's more religious fervor in the South, whereas Massachusetts would have less religious beliefs from its citizens. Of course, that's a generalization, but I just think it's one way that you could demonstrate your understanding of how our American society has changed over the course of centuries. So I hope that helps everybody. Again, I'll post the pages in the textbook that could help you. You could always go online to look information. I gave you an awful lot of information here. I'm looking now to see who makes the effort to fulfill all 6 components. It's really 4, but all 6 points in the essay. I kept it at 13 minutes, which I think is very fair, and I wish you all the best of luck, and I will see you in class.